This image that you see right now in front of you, well, it's an image that, truth be told, encapsulates how a billion Indians are still feeling. Being that close to the World Cup, but having to look away and walk past because your team did not end up winning the trophy. However, it also in many ways evokes what is a very familiar feeling for India in ICC tournaments in the recent past. In fact, India's streak, or rather winless streak as far as ICC tournaments go, or winning ICC tournaments go, is currently at 10 years and counting, because the last time that India actually won an ICC tournament, it was in the 2013 Champions Trophy. Since then, there has been nothing in the form of ICC tournament success, despite the fact that the Indian cricket team have remained giants as far as bilateral cricket is concerned. But if you have to rank it, where exactly does 2023 rank in terms of being the most heartbreaking losses that India have actually had? We thought we'd go over this video because there have been so many instances really in recent memory where India have flattered to deceive when it comes to ICC tournaments. But before we go on to ranking the list, let's first set about a little bit of criteria. So there are three major criteria that we will be taking into account when you're talking about ranking these heartbreaks. So first off, the losses had to have happened in a knockout game, so a semi-final or a final, which means that 2021 or 2003 have been eliminated. In fact, we're only looking at tournaments that took place after the Champions Trophy, so the 2014 World T20 and now culminating with the 2023 ODI World Cup. And we're not counting World Test Championships either, because again, that is just a whole different thing altogether. It's the test format. We're sticking to white ball cricket, and of course the World Test Championship is relatively new. Plus, we're looking at the magnitude of the match. Was it a semi or a final? As well as the fact was, let's say, what was the magnitude, not just magnitude of the match, but also how fancied were the Indian team going into that particular game. So these are the three criteria. It is, of course, as we mentioned, first off, the criteria is that it has to have happened in a knockout game. What was the magnitude? Was it a semi or a final? And were the Indian team fancied or unfancied going into that particular game? So keeping all of these in mind, that means there's seven, let's say, heartbreaks for us to rank. You've got the 2014, you've got 2015, 16, 17, 19, 22, and now 23. Those are the seven. How do those rank? Without further ado, let's just get straight to it. We're starting our list with number 7 being the 2015 World Cup semi-finals. Now, I hear what you're saying. I mean, this was a tournament where India was really good. Remember, they lost out to Australia, but India were also unbeaten going into the semi-finals. They won every single one of their group games, including the one against Pakistan, and had also won the quarterfinals by a pretty convincing margin against Bangladesh. Yet, it is safe to say that given Australia were hosting the tournament and given the kind of pedigree and quality that they had across the team, they were the clear favourites. So India were going into this match as the underdogs. They weren't going in as the favourites, despite the fact that they hadn't lost a game up until that point. And that is sadly exactly what happened. They were unable to overcome the odds, and Australia went on to lift a pretty one-sided World Cup, because again, their semi-final was very one-sided. The final of that tournament was also very one-sided, and one of the reasons it was is because that Australia team were just so good. They were the favourites and they lived up to their billing of being favourites, which is why this World Cup loss ranks relatively low on this list. At number 6, a bit of a controversial pick. Here we go. It is the 2019 World Cup semis. Now, I know what you're thinking. This was heartbreaking because of that run out, Dhoni's last match, all of that. But purely from a sporting perspective, this wasn't that big of a loss. I mean, yes, India, again, like 2015, had topped their group. In this case, it was the round-robin group that India had topped. This was the time, the first World Cup that you returned to the format of 1992, where all teams played each other. India topped the round-robin group, but it's also worth noting that they had a number of glaring issues. The one being that you were heavily reliant on your top 3. Your number 4 batter was not sorted at all, and more importantly, your lower middle order didn't inspire all that much confidence, and all of those issues came back to bite you big time in the semi-final against New Zealand. You had your typical bad half an hour, and we'll get to that one later. You ended up losing your top 3 relatively cheaply thanks to Matt Henry and of course Trent Bolt. Your number 4 problems came to the fore because you had, of all people, Rishabh Pant batting at number 4, and Pant, lest we forget, had not even made it to the original 15. He was there as an injury replacement because Shikhar Dhawan had gotten injured early on in the tournament. So it It was chaos. A player who was not even the designated number 4 at that point, that was, by the way, Vijay Shankar, was playing at number 4 in a crunch game. Didn't really do much. The middle or the lower order also kind of flattered to receive, with the exception of Ravi Jadeja, and you ended up losing to New Zealand. So, whilst that visual of MS Dhoni losing, undoubtedly heartbreaking, purely from a sporting spectacle, this wasn't really that unexpected. In fact, the big surprise was that it took as long as the semi-final for such a loss to happen, given coming into the semis, you'd only lost to England, but the game against New Zealand was washed out. Beyond that, you had won every single match, but all of those matches came with big contributions from your top order. What was to happen if that top order faltered? We found that out in the semi-finals. And now for number 5. Number 5, we have the 2016 World T20 semi-finals. Now again, this might seem like a bit of a weird pick because again, India were hosting this World Cup. So you'd think that given that the World Cup was in home conditions, that they would be the favourites, but not really. They were kind of the underdogs due to one very simple reason. This was seen as a team that was somewhat in transition. They had just been a year earlier that you had lost the semi-finals of the ODI World Cup. So you were bringing in some newer faces, but this was very much a work in progress team, and you barely made it to the semi-finals. That is also something that people tend to forget, because you ended up losing one group stage match to New Zealand of all teams, when Kane Williamson superbly read the conditions in Nagpur and dropped Trent Bolt and Tim Southee to bring in an extra spinner and bamboozled India, defended a pretty low total, and India, by the way, were one or two good balls away from potentially being knocked out of the group stage. Why? Because they only ended up beating Bangladesh on the last ball. If Bangladesh had not self-destructed so spectacularly, you could have potentially been looking at a group stage exit in a home World Cup. Imagine how disastrous that would have been. And then, once you were in the semi-finals, you knew that the opposition that you were going to be coming up against, you were not really better man than any of them. You were up against a West Indies side that were on an inspired run. And if you had to even make it to the other side, you were up against a revamped England and a New Zealand who had already exposed your flaws. So even there was every chance that you would not have possibly won this tournament, despite it being a world T20 that was happening in your very own backyard. Now, we're entering the final, more interesting parts of the list. What makes the top 4? It's another semi-final of the T20 World Cup, but this time we're talking about 2022, 6 years on from 2016. Now, once again, India had no real problems in the group stages. They topped it. They won a thrilling match against Pakistan. The only loss that you had was against South Africa, and even that was on an absolute minefield of a track, so it was written off very, very easily. But there were many issues with the team. For one, the personnel you weren't really sure of, because again, you had Dinesh Karthik playing the finisher role, but he wasn't being very effective with it, or at least not as effective as he was with the Royal Challengers Bangalore in the IPL. And despite the fact that pretty much every big team was playing a wrist spinner or a leg spinner as their primary spin bowling option, you were going with Ravichandran Ashwin, who hadn't played T20s in over a year at that point and was recalled just because the team management suddenly decided, hey, maybe we need an off spinner, despite the fact that off spinners don't really work out that well in white ball cricket, or at least in T20 cricket anymore. Your lead spinner was an off spinner. Look how well that served you. So there was that one issue, and the other thing was team style issues. What was the team style? You had a new captain in Rohit Sharma who was trying to break the shackles, make the team play more aggressively, more freely. That wasn't really happening. You had 3 anchors in Rohit himself, KL Rahul, and of course Virat Kohli at the top of the order. The only players who really played T20 style cricket in that batting lineup were the likes of Surya Kumar Yadav, Hardik Pandya, and of course Ravindra Jadeja, who was coming to bat at number 7. So you weren't really actually doing much justice really to that team, when most of the good batting only started from the lower order. Naturally, all of this came back to haunt them in the semi-finals, because due to some conservative batting from the top order, they only ended up setting a very basic target, and England pulverized you by 10 wickets. And in fact, this picture which you see here is in fact that shot which ended the game, when Joss Butler smacked that 6 down the ground and then let out a roar of celebration. You lost to the team that would eventually go on to be crowned world champions, but that wasn't much of a consolation. And now we're into the top 3, and I know what you're thinking. So far, all of these matches have been semi-finals. What about the finals we've lost? Well, we're getting to that now, because as I said, if you've lost out in a final, automatically it ranks much higher. So number 3, We start with the 2017 Champions Trophy final. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can this be at number 3? This would potentially be at number 2 or even number 1 because you lost to Pakistan. But here's the thing. This particular trophy should have been India's quite easily because they qualified for the semis with relative ease. Yes, they had that one loss to Sri Lanka, which was a surprise, but again, it wasn't unnecessarily seen as anything less than a small road bump. However, in that final, that traditional bad 30 minutes ended up biting you and biting you hard because an inspired spell from a Mohammad Amir pretty much demolished your top order. If that sounds like it was something that's already happened, it's because pretty much exactly the same thing happened in 2019. Rohit gone early, Virat gone early, Shikhar Dhawan gone early, the rest of the batting severely compromised. Pak ended up pulling off what was in fact an upset given that India had so comfortably thrashed them when the two sides met in the group stages. But that's just how it was. This was very much at the time when people were questioning what is it that India need to do to be winning a ICC tournament. It's 6 years later, we're still asking the exact same questions. At number 2, we have, in fact, another final, the 2014 World T20 final. Now again, 2014 was an upset for 2 reasons. One, because you had just been a year removed from winning the Champions Trophy, so you were seen very much as the team on the rise. And again, India entered the final without having lost a single game, so they were clearly seen as the side to beat. They didn't lose a single game in the group stage. Of course, they didn't lose the knockout match. They were unbeaten going to the final, and they were outright favourites against Sri Lanka. Let's make no bones about it. Yes, the Sri Lanka team did have some good players, but they were not expected to be going toe-to-toe with India, especially when you consider that prior to that in 2011, the last time these two sides had met in an ICC event final, it was India who had emerged victorious. But some inspiring play from Sri Lanka's old veterans, including Kumar Sangakkara, you had Lasith Malinga put on a good time. Don't forget, in India at that point, the batting was absolutely shredded except for Virat Kohli. He had a good knock, but no one else could come to the party. And the winning runs were struck by Thisara Pereira in the second innings, and it wasn't a very tough chase at all for the Sri Lankans. Yes, India did make life a little tough for them by getting a couple of wickets, but the runs were just not enough on the board. And at number 1, the 2023 World Cup final. Yes, 2023 ranks right up there at the top of the list as far as heartbreaks in an ICC tournament go, for 2 major reasons. One, they had won 10 matches out of 10 before the final, not one single loss, and not just that, there was not one match where they even came close to losing. The closest you came to actually tasting some kind of defeat was against New Zealand, and even that was a comparatively comfortable win when looked at from a distance. You were in the form of your life, despite the fact that Hardik Pandya, a key player, had been ruled out, and therefore Rohit's side were the favourites to win, overwhelmingly so. Not only were you in the best of form, you were going to be playing the final in front of a home crowd, and you had a ton of experienced players, all of whom were finding form at just the right time. Yet what happens? You end up beaten comfortably by an Australia side that were more disciplined, more committed, and more ruthless on the day. And that is why this ends up ranking as possibly the biggest heartbreak that India have suffered, because this is the one time, aside from maybe 2014 and 17, where India were outright favourites, but it wasn't just say one batting collapse or one moment, a bad half an hour that defined it. No, you were comfortably outplayed by the Aussies, which is why 2023 will, for quite some time, rank as being the biggest heartbreak. Many will argue and say, no, maybe 2003 could have been that, but in 2003 you were always the underdogs, and losing therefore was not really a big surprise. Here, Australia were the underdogs, the tables had turned, but Australia found a way to beat an India team that were the favourites, not just in terms of merit, but also because they were playing on a pitch that should have, in theory, suited not just their batters, but also their bowlers. Australia beat you on a pitch that you were favourites to win on. That is what makes this so heartbreaking, and of course the fact that it prolongs that misery. This isn't recency bias. 5 years time, you ask me this question, I'll still say this: 2023 will be the final that hurt the most, because you lost when you were outright favourites. But what are your thoughts on the entire matter? You can let us know that in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, tap the bell icon, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget to download the SportsTak app, and if you're already on the channel, well, go ahead, check out some other videos we've done, and stay tuned because we have plenty more coming your way. For now though, from my side, it's goodbye.